thank you all for being here. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast like myself, and good afternoon to those of you who are on the East Coast. And thank you for coming to this panel on lessons learned from navigating the job market. My name is Talani Britton. I am an associate professor. I'm getting used to saying that. It happened this summer at University of California, Berkeley School of Education. And today we have 5 speakers who have had very different sort of job market experiences. We have Sabrina Bishu, who's an assistant professor at the University of Washington, William Jackson, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the American University, Walter Campbell, who is a senior associate at Apt Associates, Alex Koujo, an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and Kimberly Klum from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I'll now turn it over to each of them in turn to briefly introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about how they came to the jobs where they currently are, starting with Siba.
Thank you, Talani, and congratulations on your tenure. So my name is Sabrina Bishu. My full name is Sabrina Bishu. I go by Siba. Like I said, I'm an assistant professor at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. I guess maybe an important introduction could be I started my career as an assistant professor right after graduating from my PhD program at Florida International University. I started as an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, Denver. The School of Public Affairs. I was there for 4 years, and I moved to the University of Washington in Seattle in the fall of 2021. Another important characteristic or identity of mine is that I was an international student during my PhD studies, and when I went on the job market, I went as an international faculty. So there were certain things that I had to consider when going on the job market. So I will stop here and pass it on to William T. Jackson.
Good afternoon. My name is William T. Jackson, and I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at American University School of Public Affairs and within the Department of Public Administration and Policy, which I started after graduating with my PhD last summer from Florida International University. And I'm also an incoming assistant professor for the Askew School of Public Administration and Policy at Florida State University, which I'll begin in the fall of 2024. Thank you. And I'll pass it along to, I believe, Alex.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Koujo. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, specifically within the Department of Political Science. And like Siba, this is my first job that I got right after graduating from the University of Colorado, Denver. So Siba and that's how we connect. And then again, just like Siba mentioned, I am also an international student, or I was an international student. And at the time that I went on the job market, I had to think through so many important aspects of what it means to be an international faculty, especially with regard to immigration and all those kinds of things. And also even how to positively sell your international experience as something that you'll bring on board to help advance any department in which you find yourself. So these are the few things that I'll say for now. And with that, I'll pass it on to Kim, I think.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. My name is Kim Klum. I have a PhD from the University of Michigan in social work and anthropology. And I currently work for, as I was introduced, for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, but more specifically, I work in the Administration for Children and Families, which is the kind of human services wing of the department. And within the Administration for Children and Families, I work in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. And I have a position as a senior social science research analyst. I'll just say that even though my PhD is in social work and anthropology, at the University of Michigan, I was affiliated with what was then the National Poverty Center. So my connection to APPAM is really as kind of somebody who was deeply immersed in doing research on social safety net, public safety net programs and poverty. And then passing it now to Walter.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Walter Campbell. I'm a senior associate at Apt Associates, and yeah, and I work in their justice group where we do sort of criminal legal research and connected issues as well. That's what my background's in. I got my PhD in that from Rutgers and master's from Penn, and then came straight to Apt after the PhD. And yeah, so I'll be kind of talking a little bit about the non-academic path. So Apt Associates is broadly described as like a consulting firm, but for those who don't really know what that means, it basically means we do sort of grants, contracts, cooperative agreements that generally the federal government, but also various other nonprofits or state governments will issue, and a lot of that is research or technical assistance and things like that. And actually work on a project for ACF right now, the Prevention Services Clearinghouse. That's one that Apt has and that I work on. So yeah, so that's the type of work. It's doing research or technical assistance, but it's just within a different type of organization than a university. Yeah.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you to each of you for talking a little bit about your journey. Now I'll ask a few sort of very specific questions that I'll direct to some of the panelists. I'll start with you, Alex, and the topic is how to prepare for the job market as a student. My first question is, when should PhD students start thinking about the job market, Alex?
It's a good question. I would say that, and this is something I can share in hindsight, okay? Because I did not necessarily know this when I got into the PhD program. But when to start, really, I think, is the very moment you enter a PhD program. Why? Because it takes so long to put yourself together, get all your actions right, and get it correct when you go on the job market. Okay, so you don't want to wait until like your final year. Okay, you really want to start the moment you get into a PhD program, building yourself, like building a brand that you're going to sell when you get onto the job market. So if you're thinking about when to start, I would say for short, just when you enter your doctoral program, in brief.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm actually going to ask you a follow-up question. In thinking about being a new entering doc student, I can't even imagine what steps I would have started thinking about. And so maybe the question is, for example, right, you have these different stages in your doctoral career. So for example, what are some of the things that you might want to do in years 1 and 2 versus years 3 and 4, and then year 5? So maybe just breaking it down to just maybe for each of those time periods, 1 or 2 concrete steps that students might want to take that don't feel overwhelming at the same time, because I think you're absolutely right. You do start at the beginning, but having students understand what some of those things are at each stage, I think might be helpful.
You're right. Now I'll say this, that going on the job market is like building and selling a brand of yourself, okay? And so first you build a brand. Alex will say, Koujo, I do this kind of research. These are my publications, etc. And then when you go on the job market, i.e. the moment, let's say you land an interview, that is the opportunity for you to sell the brand that you have been building for, say, the past 5 years or 6 years. So let me focus a bit more on what might constitute some of the essentials of building that brand, okay? And you want to think about the different entailments of building a brand as some of the things that your prospective employers would look out for, okay? And here I'll just highlight about, say, 5 things. So number 1, it's great that you will have publications. As they say in this craft, you publish or you perish, okay? So you want to think seriously about, even when you have just started your PhD, getting some publications under your belt. How do you do that? Especially because it is perhaps your very first experience. two thoughts I'll leave with you there. One, you can collaborate. And so if you're working with an assistant professor, if you're working with a faculty member, not necessarily an assistant professor, if you're working with any faculty, you can collaborate with them. That is one way. And then two, in my experience, almost every semester you are writing a term paper or 10 papers. Okay. Now you want to take those 10 papers seriously in such a way that at the end of the semester, they are clean and good enough to be shipped out in terms of taking it for a journal, taking to a journal for publication consideration. And so even by the time that you get to your second year, you probably would have about 1 or 2 term papers that you may have given to some faculty members for them to look at it for you, review it for you, get some feedback, improve upon them, and then ship them out. So that if you are intentional about this publication thing, by the time you get out of school or you go on the job market, you probably have about 3 or 4 or 5, which really isn't bad for somebody on the job market. So that's the way you can think about your publication. You can collaborate and then be intentional about your term papers so you can convert them into publishable material. The other thing I want to say is that when you have these term papers and you are collaborating, you also want to make sure that you submit them to conferences and workshops. So those are great avenues to build networks, because it will surprise you to know that, hey, this academic thing, it's a really small world. So that the people you meet at conferences and the workshops, trust me, they might be the same people you will meet when you go on the job market. They might be a faculty member at the school that you may have applied to or something like that. Okay, so you want to build great connections, great networks. And by this, I don't necessarily mean that you want to be instrumental in the way you build relationships. I think it's important that your relationships are authentic. You care about people and they also care about you, and your friendships with them are genuine. It doesn't mean that if you know a faculty member in a school, they will necessarily hire you, but at least they can provide a few tips here and there about a job, give you some insights that you may not necessarily have if you didn't know anybody in that department. So pay particular attention to attending conferences and build authentic networks and relationships. The third one I would say is that you want to have a clear research agenda, because there's so many things that you can write about. There are so many things that you can research into, right? But if they look at me, Alex, or if they look at Siba, for example, they want to see some consistency in your, say, your CV or your cover letter or some of the things, some of the document that you submit as part of your application document. So you want to get everything right, or some say near right, so that if somebody looks at you, they are not in any doubt about what kind of research you do and what questions you seek to answer. I would say that when you are in school, this can take a bit of time to flesh out. So at least it's important that you think about it all the time, discuss it with people, and then over time, it becomes something that is really identical to you, so that if anybody mentions your name, they know exactly what you are researching and what kinds of questions you want to address. So getting clear on your research agenda is the third thing I want to share. The fourth one, I'll say engage in some extracurricular stuff. I mean, APPAM has Student Activities Council or something like that. I remember I served on that committee for a while. So that gives you the opportunity to also know what students are experiencing, what schools are doing for their students and all of that. Getting some service experience under your belt, that can also be helpful. And then last but not least, I would say get some hands-on experience. If you get the opportunity to teach before you get out of school, please do that, because schools like it if you can demonstrate some capacity to put together a course syllabus and develop slides and actually teach a course. So by all means, you want to get at least one hands-on experience in being able to teach. And if you can also write some grants, that's also great. You don't have to be successful, but at least you can demonstrate the experience of being able to put together a grant proposal and submitting it. So I just want to leave you with these 5 thoughts as things that I would say constitute building a brand that you can sell when you go on the job market, because these 5 things I think are important to your prospective employers.
Thank you, Alex. Siba, I'll turn it to you now. How should international students prepare for the job market? I think Alex laid out 5 steps that are really helpful. Thinking about term papers and relationships, attending conferences. What might be particularly important when we're thinking about the international student perspective?
Thank you, Talani. I am going to share a slide here. Can you guys see it? All right, okay. So, before I get into my specific topic, I just want to reiterate a couple of points from Alex's point. Is that okay, Talani? Just real quick. Okay.
This is your time, Siba, so it is.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I would say, and perhaps most of the people who are attending this workshop have already passed, right, the stages of building their brand from the beginning. But I think for those of us who may be in 3rd, 4th, or 5th year, getting ready to be in the job market, I think you still have the chance to think about how you can frame this brand and identity. I always say that there's a science to the academic job market, or just even to academia, right? We don't have to really reinvent a lot, right? So, but there is an art and there is a science. And when we're going on the job market for the first time, we have not done it before and we haven't done it before in this academic setting. There is that skill to be learned on how to build this brand, how to write a cover letter, how to write a research statement, a teaching statement, right? And I always introduce my graduate students to the Professors in handbook, which was really instrumental in helping me prepare myself when I went on the job market. The Professors in, we can put the link to the book on this chat, but I think that is a great place to start to just really break down. It really helps break down the art and science of putting together this application documents. The second is mentorship and peer mentors. Like, I cannot really emphasize more how choosing your mentor really matters. Like, who from the faculty in your school have the kind of career, work-life balance, identity, who they are as scholars that you want to replicate in your life, right? Because really, we're really inventing ourselves in this space, and learn from them. Ask to collaborate, ask to help, ask to learn. So that is something that you can also do in the 5 or 4 years that you are in a PFI, or however long it takes you to be in a PhD program. So mentorship is important. Peer mentorship is important. That was one of the greatest gifts that my PhD program offered me at Florida International University, like having peers who you can learn from, who can review your materials for you. English as a second language, that was me. Just having my American and English speaking colleagues, peer PhD students really helped me build. That was super important. It takes a village to succeed. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Okay, so the international students, this is a very important topic, and close dear to my heart, because this is my identity. I'm a Black woman from Ethiopia, from Africa, and this is a very strong identity in this part of, very specific identity, right, in this part of the world. And who I am matters to the experience that I have in the in academia as an institution. So there's so much learning to do. That is not something that my I would say my American colleagues, friends, or even those from Europe and other places of the world may not necessarily experience. So this, I'm speaking from my heart to those of you who may be experiencing this. So timing matters, right? So for first-time job applicants, timing, you just put everything in a nutshell, it will be like timing matters, right? Consider you have to essentially have a few things prepared in case one fails, one delays, and just having that cushion, because your opportunity to to engage in an academic institution in the US really depends on your paperwork, your visa paperwork. So we have the OPT opportunity, right? If we when we study here as a graduate student. Oftentimes, I didn't do my OPT because my institution, University of Colorado, Denver, applied for my H-1B way ahead of time, and I didn't need it. But oftentimes, it's recommended to consider applying for your OPT, and then while waiting for your institution to start engaging in processing your H-1B, which is your work visa. You're applying for OPT or even starting the H-1B visa application by your institution does not necessarily mean that by the time you're ready to start your job in September, they will be ready. No. So you have to be in constant engagement with the institution that has hired you, offered you, right? To make sure that they are on top of the paperwork. If you apply for an OPT and plan to use your first year on your OPT and then it hasn't come through, go for H-1B as soon as possible, and universities can pay some fees and apply for in 2 weeks expedited H-1B visa application. Because at the end of the day, the first day of job, you will not be able to start your job unless you have your visa active and running. And then, so this is just when starting the job. But if we backtrack a little bit, it is very important that you understand the school's policy on sponsorship. Not every school will sponsor work visa for international candidates. You have to do your due diligence in screening through schools and applying to schools that can support this application for you. I do not encourage reaching out to school and asking them if they may apply because you don't want to. It doesn't mean they will be biased, but I would not encourage you going and reaching out and asking if they will sponsor. Do that research. You can find it online. You can find it on the international ISSS office of the institution and find if they provide sponsorship. And also consider how long the visa application process might take. And then once you have got the job, the school sponsors you on a work visa, then you also want to make sure that even though they sponsor you for a work visa, that they would sponsor you on a path that could lead you to obtaining your residency, which is your green card application. There are some jobs that would sponsor you for H-1B, but not necessarily for the green card. The ultimate goal is that, and that's a benefit and privilege we have in academic institutions, you want to be able, the goal is often to get into an institution that would apply, put you in a track to apply for a green card. And that is expensive. Some schools may not cover the cost. They may sponsor you for applying for labor certification and I-140, which is the employer petition for alien worker, and then after which you can apply for adjustment of status that can lead you into a green card. This cost by itself is a few thousands of dollars. So you want to negotiate and be able to be in a place once you've got the job offer and they start the process, you want to be able to negotiate on covering this cost. Often, so in my case, the University of Colorado, Denver was gracious enough. It covered the cost of applying for labor certification and the processing the I-140, which is the employee petition for alien worker. But when it came to applying for the I-485, that adjustment of status, schools, because of conflict of interest, would not be able to engage or hire a lawyer for you to process that. That falls on you. I have never heard a case where a school would cover that. If there is, but clearly because you do a medical screening and there's few items that may prevent your green card application, that may, but it is a matter of privacy. So schools often, so you still would have to prepare financially for that process. If transitioning like I did from University of Colorado to University of Washington, and your green card processing is your adjustment of status processing is pending, it's still going on, I would refrain from engaging if you're at a stage where the university lawyer is supporting your application, right? Do not engage the university lawyer, current university lawyer. And what would that mean for if you move? Because your institution is investing on you currently. You do not want to hamper, you don't want anything to be a roadblock. Get your own lawyer, figure out externally how you can make that transitioning without you falling through the crack visa-wise, right? So I say that. And then also just consider how this transition might actually affect your visa, your residency process. If you are at the stage where you're doing the adjustment of status and that's your own hired lawyer, you can talk to your lawyer in that case, but just consider the transitioning. I was essentially on the age where I was waiting for my green card. And if I had changed the institution, that I was lucky enough that my green card came in April and I moved to the University of Washington in September. So, but I had it in the back of my mind. I communicated to the University of Washington that if that process fails through, that they would sponsor me. I still had to, even though I've done this process 2 years at University of Colorado, Denver, if I transition and the process is hampered, I needed to make sure that University of Washington would sponsor me. And I had that all in mind, before, at the time of accepting that job at University of Washington. So those are some things to consider, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Siba. William, we're going to move to you next and ask a little bit about career transitions. The first question is, why did you decide to transition? So why don't we start there? Why did you decide to transition?
Well, my experience in academia is a little different than the traditional pathways that are usually taken. I pretty much worked within the nonprofit sector for over 12 and a half years, and I decided that I wanted to get a PhD in public affairs, not necessarily to go into academia, but to expand my knowledge on the issues of in regards to disparate outcomes within the juvenile justice system, along with researching pathways that could mitigate the inequities that we currently see that exist in American society. So a long story short, I basically started my PhD journey as a practitioner with the intent to do work continuously within the nonprofit sector. However, during my time as a PhD student, I pretty much enjoyed the applied and academic research that I was conducting. Also, I had the opportunity to expand my knowledge on theories that were applicable to practice and learning new methods and approaches that were addressing my research questions. And also, I learned the flexibility and privileges that comes with being an academic. I realized this while also becoming the founder and the board president of an organization, which is a 501c3, while being a PhD student. In addition, as Sybil was explaining earlier, your mentor, advisor, major professor, this is an important individual during your PhD journey. And my major professor pretty much advised that I should pursue a career in academia since I was putting in the time and work as a PhD student and candidate. Pretty much this is one of the main reasons why I decided to transition from being a practitioner to being within the academic community. Thank you. Your next question?
Yes, I do. So it's more of a follow-up. So it sounds like you started the PhD journey, not exactly sure what you were going to do with it. And so I hear one piece of it, certainly the mentorship. Someone suggested to you, having seen your work, that you should think about the academy. Are there other sort of influences, particularly given that you didn't go in planning to become a professor, that helped you sort of think about what path you wanted to take once you completed the PhD?
Yes, I would say, based on my experience, if you are undecided about a career in academia, then I would recommend looking into postdoctoral fellowship opportunities. Since this was the case with me, I knew that I wanted to gain a greater foundation in academia, which is why I sought out a postdoc. before starting an academic career as an assistant professor. Also, I graduated a little earlier. I graduated in less than 4 years. So a postdoc to me was highly considered since I wanted to continue just building a stronger foundation. And as Alex was saying, developing my research agenda to be more clear and direct on what I want to actually continue to do as a researcher or as a scholar. So that was very helpful for me with, this postdoctoral opportunity that I have at American University. I also had the experience of being on the job market twice. The first time was when I landed my position as a postdoctoral fellow at American University. And the second time was when I accepted my offer from Florida State University. One thing to consider is that there are pros and cons that come with accepting a postdoc. One of the major pros is that it allows you the opportunity to have firsthand knowledge on the fact of if academia is a good fit for you, and it allows you to develop a more effective and robust research agenda. However, the cons of the postdoc are the fact that you may have to move after graduation and then relocate soon after for your next position. And this takes time and costs. And if you don't have an academic position already lined up after the postdoc, then you will be back on the job market during your postdoc, which takes a lot more time. Thankfully, I was able to land a good position at FSU, which grants me the opportunity to stay at American University as a postdoc fellow for a second year. This also allows me the opportunity to continue on my current research, enhance my teaching, and provide adequate services to the institution and within the discipline.
Thank you, William. Kim, next we're going to move to you and ask you a few questions about working in government. Can you start by giving a brief overview of the types of job opportunities available within the government? And I know that's super broad, so you get to choose your own adventure here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Talani. Well, I'm not a full expert on all the things you can do with a PhD in the federal government, but I'll start with my position, and then I'll kind of explain what other opportunities there are. But it is nice for Walter and I to represent the kind of non-academic path, but I knew that I wanted to do something applied. That was always my interest. I had thought about doing an academic route, but the kinds of things, the kinds of questions I wanted to work on, the kinds of topics I wanted to work on, I was much more interested in the kind of in the actual programs and the policies and in the kind of public safety net world. So the work that I do, I get to work within the Administration for Children and Families. As I said, we're kind of the big human services agency. We run programs like Head Start. We oversee child welfare services. We oversee the Temporary Administration for Needy Families program, a whole range of other programs as well. And my office is tasked with really being the kind of evidence building office for our whole agency. Some of that is basic research, but really a lot of it is program evaluation. But in my particular office, I don't actually conduct the research. Instead, I get to hire awesome people like Walter to actually conduct the research, but I get to design the research. And when I mean design, which is I come up with the kind of like overall kind of research plan. People like Walter who work for organizations like Walter then actually like figure out the kind of intricacies of like how particular analyses might be conducted. But I get to have a lot of say in terms of what the topic of the research will be, what the kind of general approach to the research will be, what kinds of tasks the research will involve. And I mean, I really love that. It's definitely the work that I do is a little bit more like project management. It's definitely not like a pure academic kind of pursuit, but I get to stay very current in research that matters to me, and very applied research. I get to work with a lot of excellent, we bring in a lot of academic experts to inform our research. We also bring in, excellent people like Walter to inform our research. So I get to stay in a very intellectual kind of environment, but I'm doing a lot of very practical work, which is solving questions about how to make our programs work better, how to better serve the populations that we serve. Anyways, there's a lot of creativity to it, which I really like. We're also a funder, which is a really nice position to be in when you know what it's like to try to, seek funding for research. It's very nice to be one of the people who actually gets to have a say in how research dollars are spent. But I'll just say, broadly, there are a lot of different opportunities to use your PhD in the federal government. There are a lot of jobs where if you are somebody who has very serious quantitative skills, like statistical skills, big data analysis skills, there's lots of very different kinds of places. It's kind of like, it is kind of choose your own adventure, because there's so many kind of quirky places in the federal government where you can apply statistical training and statistical use. You can work with big data sets. Census has an amazing array of opportunities for people who are actually then using census data to conduct their own research. I mean, research that's obviously directed by their office. But other opportunities include, working at National Institute of Health. You get to be somebody who in some ways is also overseeing research, but you're, kind of overseeing big research agendas and helping figure out who should be funded out of all these amazing academic researchers. You're helping lift up and help shape kind of academic fields that are organized around different research priorities. And I was going to say one other thing, which is also there's a lot of research where, so in a sister office that's very close to ours, again, there's a lot of opportunities to work with government data and to be conducting original analyses of that government data that's very hard for outside researchers to actually access. And then you can be publishing papers that are actually used by the federal government to inform our own work, but it's also research that has broader relevance in the kind of policy and research field. So you're not just answering narrow questions that are only interesting to the federal government. You're answering sometimes very big questions about like who's accessing services, who's being excluded from services, how much of the population is being kind of reached by different services, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can have a really nice influence on larger conversations outside your own kind of scope.
Thank you, Kim. And one other question, for students who are interested in working in government after graduation or transitioning to a post in government, are there fellowships or programs that you recommend or know of?
That is a great question. There actually are programs that are, they actually are programs for master's students that are open to PhD students. And I'm so sorry. I will think of this and I'll put it in the chat, but it is one way in which people come in. But there's also like sometimes, depending on what your PhD affiliation is, your professional society from your, like for example, child development psychology, they have a very active fellowship program that places people in the federal government, also places people in Congress. And there's also the AAAS fellowship, which is, again, an excellent fellowship. It kind of tends to be, it's both within federal agencies and within Congress. But yeah, there are definitely ones to look at, are often ones that are affiliated with your kind of academic professional organizations.
Thank you for those suggestions, Kim. Walter, can you talk a little bit about the job market that you entered? So my understanding is you were not necessarily looking at positions in the academy, but you were looking at other kinds of research positions, sometimes called non-academic. I don't like that term, so I'm not using it very deliberately because I think it's different job markets. So can you talk a little bit about your decision to pursue another research opportunity that was not necessarily university-based and what you did to prepare for that?
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Non-academic isn't a great term because it kind of defines it by what it's not, which is, I don't know, it's never really that helpful. But it really is just sort of I was looking at research within companies like APT and, places like RAND or Urban Institute or other ones that you may have also heard of. And they that do research, but do it in this way where they're sort of directly working off grants or contracts or cooperative agreements that get issued by the federal government, but also by states, nonprofits, all of that. And I think one of the obvious differences is there's really no teaching involved there, right? That's not part of the job. I like teaching, so that wasn't like a motivating factor for me, but if you do like teaching, there is a lot of mentorship involved in this work, so you still get some of that. But there's some other differences, and those were ones that sort of steered me into this path as opposed to in the academic job market. So one is, I think, what Kim just mentioned is sort of a more direct link to sort of kind of daily practices within a field. Not that you cannot, you certainly can gear your academic work around that, and you can gear your research around that, but it is sort of almost a given within these non-academic, so I'll use the term because it's just, yeah, easier, but within these institutions, it's sort of a given that you're going to be working on projects that have potentially a direct effect on sort of how the federal government functions, or oftentimes on how states or local governments, if it's research that's going to kind of more broadly inform. So a lot of the work you go for, because it is work that there's, you know, a solicitation out for, something that people are really kind of directly interested in, sort of guiding day-to-day operations. And so that's nice to kind of feel that direct connection. There's also, and yeah, I think another element is sort of the scale of work. So it's not as though, certainly as an academic, you can fulfill certain grants and contracts and things like that and do that kind of work, but there are ones that are just so large that you would have to just compile a pretty giant team of academics to get it done. And so at a place like APT or our competitors, you already have that team in place. So you can go for work that requires, you know, I think the Prevention Services Clearinghouse that I work on now, I'm gonna really guess here, but I mean, maybe 50 people work on that project. It's a big project, right? That's hard to get together as an academic. That's very easy as like a company like APT. So you can have a substantial role within a project like that. Some of the other differences are the kind of approach to research because of that. So it's tends to be fairly collaborative, and a lot of times, you know, that you can collaborate in academia, but you are really, as you know, as Alex said, you're building a personal brand. You're not necessarily, you are building a personal brand in a place like APT, but you are also building kind of a team brand. And every project, I've never worked on a project alone. I've never worked on a project with less than 5 people. That's just not how the work gets done. And so there's a lot of collaboration. I think that personally, I think that makes for good science. It makes me feel better about the kind of end product, to know that there's a lot of other smart people working on the exact same thing. So, and I like working in that fashion. Another aspect of it is that the work can be a little more varied. So a downside is you're not building a specific brand like Alex was talking about, because you really kind of have to go where there are, you know, if you do work for, you know, for an agency like ACF, whatever their funding is kind of the direction your work's going to go in, and that may not align with exactly what what your research interests are. So that's, I guess, a downside. But the positive to that is that you have more diversity in what you can work on, because at a company like APT or our competitors, there's a lot of different projects going on at once. And so you can kind of jump in on projects that maybe you wouldn't have ever done work in that field before. Again, I mentioned my background's in the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system, and there's some connection with the juvenile justice system and Prevention Services Clearinghouse, but otherwise it's a very different style of project than probably anything I would have worked on in academia. And it was through that juvenile justice connection that I was bridged to that work, and I really enjoy it. So it's definitely a good example of something I don't know if I would have worked on if I'd gone the academic route. And then the last piece is kind of work-life balance. And I think this is really personal, you kind of already talked about the advantages of academia is you have a lot more freedom in your schedule, which I think for a lot of people is great. For me, I like having a structured schedule. And at a place like APT, there is that. I mean, you're occasionally expected to work weekends when there's a big proposal or, you know, a final report for a project or something. You're occasionally expected to work, you know, after hours, but it's not the norm. And the norm is a 40-hour week with maybe plus or minus a little bit. And at most places like APTA, it's not universal, but most places that's the norm. And I found that structure helpful. I think we're all probably everyone in this chat is pretty type A. And I found that for me helped like rein in the impulse to always be working. And that was good. But I think some people like the freedom of academia, but for me, that was a benefit. So those are the primary reasons that kind of highlight some of the differences.
Thank you, Walter. Right now, we're opening it up for audience questions, and I'll read the first audience question. So just if you could drop those in the chat, I will read them out. The first question we have, is actually for William, and it's asking how you get a postdoc and an assistant professor position at the same time. Do you accept both and then ask the assistant professor position to delay?
It depends on the institution. For myself, I actually received a postdoc first. I was on the market my fourth year of the PhD program, and that's how I was able to receive the postdoc for last year. And then I was back on the market this past last year fall, which I received the position at Florida State University. However, I do have a colleague who actually received a postdoc and an assistant professor position at the same time. And the institution actually allowed her to do the postdoc for 1 year, and then she went to the institution the following year for her assistant professor position. In my case, I received the position last fall for Florida State University, and they allowed me to stay 1 additional year at American University because, one, being on the market, in my opinion, is also another job. So starting at a new institution, teaching, doing research, service, and being on the market at the same time, I don't feel that I fully was able to grasp what the postdoc experience had to offer at American University. So I want to stay an additional year, and Florida State allowed me to do so. So it depends on the institution, it depends on the department, and that's a conversation you can have when you're negotiating your respective position.
That's really helpful. So you really have it once you start the negotiations. Are there other questions? I don't see any others in the chat, but if someone wanted to raise their hand, or if there was somebody up, Siba, is that your? Yes.
I was going to, can I add as we wait for the next question to come? So I just wanted to mention that opportunities for postdoc or fellowships do not necessarily end once you are an assistant professor. Like for me, taking a postdoc would have been a risk in terms of my visa because of the 1 year or 2 years short turnaround to be on a visa and then find a job. You know, the risk. So I went for the assistant professor job. But while I was an assistant professor, I applied for a non-resident fellowship at the Kennedy School, the Women in Public Policy program. I got accepted. It was a 1 year fellowship, extended for 2 more years. So I total of 3 years, which I did in conjunction with my assistant professor role at UC Denver. And my dean was super supportive. Of course, you need an institution that would be. So I did my role and my responsibilities at UC Denver while also engaging in this fellowship. And I think it prepared me pretty well for my next academic career jump that I did. So that is also another potential opportunity.
Thank you, Siba. And for those who are interested, the Spencer Foundation as well has a postdoc where essentially they give you money that will help buy out your time, so that, and once again, non-residential, and it's called a postdoctoral fellowship, and it's the Spencer Foundation. And similarly, it will help buy out your time so that you can spend a year focusing on your research. And there are a number of other opportunities, but I think, Siba, that's a really great point that there are many assistant professors who also find fellowships whereby they can sort of be relieved of some of their faculty responsibilities. And it's a good deal for the institution because they're usually quite prestigious and, you know, provide funding, and it allows junior professors to spend some time working on projects, solely on their research projects. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I'll just, I'm seeing a question in the chat. Does it matter? Oh, there are a couple now. I guess it's like that last 8 minutes. Does it matter where you get the postdoc, whether it's a private university or a public university? So for those who have done postdocs, does it matter where you get the postdoc?
I don't think it matters when it concerns private or public university, but it does matter depending on the institution and what your responsibilities will be. Because some postdocs are very specific on a specific project, and some postdocs, like the one that I have, actually is not that specific. The focus is basically to help me to develop as a researcher. So most of my time is focused on research, and then also the opportunity to enhance my skills as a educator. So I teach one course each semester, but I know that there's some postdocs that are catered to maybe a grant, a specific project within the department. So those are things you want to make sure that you look into when applying for a postdoc. But private or public, I don't think that matters.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, William. This question is directed to both Walter and Kim. Can you guys both talk a little bit more about how you ended up in your current roles, the career path out of the degree, and the kinds of both organizations and agencies you considered working at? So if each of you could speak a little bit about that. So the question once again is how you ended up in your current role, like when you left your degree, and what kinds of organizations and agencies were you looking at more broadly? Why don't we start with you, Kim?
Oh, okay. I was going to offer to Walter. Yeah. I'll just say I'll just make it very brief so we can hear from Walter as well, which is that I will say it took me almost a full year to transition from my PhD academic kind of track to the job that I wound up first getting, because I thought I had many more applied skills than I actually did have. I think if you're a very highly quantitatively trained person, that might be different. I was a qualitatively trained person, and I wanted to do kind of policy, programmatically relevant work. So it took me a lot of networking and figuring out what kinds of positions existed out there for people like me. And I will say that is really a great track to take, no matter what you're doing, academic or non-academic. Like networking. I had like many informational interviews, and they were all incredibly helpful. But I only ever considered working at the Department of Health and Human Services because what I cared about was the issues that are covered by that department.
Yeah, and I can say too, it also took a little bit of time for me. And so I intentionally started early, thinking it might to find my current job, and some of that is that it's not on the same like hiring schedule that the academic calendar is necessarily. It kind of mirrors it because there's more applicants out there as programs end, but not completely. So that's something to keep in mind if you're applying to jobs like mine. And and I was looking for places exactly like this. I applied to a few research positions within state and federal government as well. So I did look there. I think there's a lot of overlap between kind of these two roles. But mostly I was looking for places like APT and its competitors, and applied to about 5 of them. And ended up at APT. APT was my favorite of the ones I got offers for. So yeah, it's I don't know that's great. I mean, it's tough because I kind of knew this was the track I wanted to go by the time, but I would say I didn't know that until I sort of got to the tail end of my PhD. There was a large period of time where I was considering academic work, and it's sort of over time I realized that this was going to be more rewarding for me. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Walter. Kim, quickly, are government agencies interested in recent master's graduates, or are they really looking mostly for people with doctorates?
No, they're both. There are a lot of folks with master's degrees are in good federal government positions.
Okay. The next questions are around publishing. And the question is it the number of research publications or the quality when thinking about a faculty job? And how does that vary with the rank of the university?
I'll say a few things with regard to that. I would say it's probably both. If you have, say, 5 publications depending on your field, public administration, public policy, in, let's say, public administration review, for example, that's super, that's great. before you actually land your first job. If you have, say, a mix, say in some tier 2 or tier 3 journal, and a few other publications, one or two, say in an outlet like JPAT, Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory, that's so great. So I would say both are important. If you can do that, both are important. I would also add that just if so, in my experience, getting published in certain journals when you're a student alone can be a little tricky, because some journals can be, just hard to penetrate. And so if you can collaborate with very experienced scholars, then they can help you penetrate those journals, okay? So I don't want a person on the job market to think that they must necessarily publish in JPAT or PAR, Public Administration Review, to get a job. If you can do that alone, that's great. If you can collaborate and get that get a publication in there, that's so great. If you don't have a publication there, but you can get one or two in a journal that is, a little below JPAT or PAR or PSJ, that's so great. That's a good potential. That's a good sign for somebody who can demonstrate the capacity to publish. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Alex. We are actually, this is
time.
really helpful and valuable information. Leslie, just a quick check. Are we ending exactly at 12?
No, if you have time to take a few more questions, you guys can do so.
Fantastic. So Alex, I really like that you want to think about number of publications. One thing that I would add to that before moving on to another question is one of the things that you can do is also show that you have things that are in the pipeline, even if it's not yet published. And so one of the things you want to have on your CV are research papers or projects that you're working on, as well as if something is a revise and resubmit, you would also want to put that on your CD. So even when you're in the job market, even if there are not as many publications, it would be really important to also demonstrate that you have a pipeline of work, which is always or part of what they're looking for, because a publication has already been, right, it's there. But if you have revise and resubmits, then you also are demonstrating that your continued productivity as a scholar. Someone asked about mail listservs or online places for public policy management job markets. Does anybody either have suggestions or want to drop anything on the chat for listservs or places that students should check when navigating the public policy or management job market? If you do, dropping them in the chat.
Public service jobs is one.
I think Chronicles of Higher Education is one. Is another one. Higher ed jobs is probably another one. And then I think APSA, American Podcast and Association, also has a job board. Occasionally you see one or two public management, public administration jobs being posted there. So that can also be a useful outlet.
Thank you. Another question.
So can I?
Oh, of course, please go ahead, Siba.
So I just wanted to add real quick one point on publication. So publication is the end goal, but the process is also equally important. We get a job, but publication is what will get us tenure. That's what will get us promotion. That's what would allow us to keep our job, right? And perform our job. So I think I cannot really emphasize more how it is important to learn the art of publishing in itself. And we can only do that when we collaborate, when we make ourselves available, humble ourselves, work with, other faculty who have gone through this process, who have published in top journals, and who have mastered or have better level of skills than we do. While a PhD student, that is your chance to learn. As a PhD student, we learn. As an assistant professor, associated full, we do publication in conjunction with every other responsibility. So I think it's important to publish and learn to publish by yourself, but even more so important to gain the skills and learn the art and science of publishing from somebody else, and really coming with the mindset of learning that art. So yeah, I just want to say that.
Yes, Alex.
one or two thoughts. I would say that all the panelists here really want, every person who goes on the job market to succeed, but sometimes you don't. Okay, and if you don't, we know it hurts. It's not fun, but it's one of those things. So you really want to learn from that experience and then get better when you go on the job market again. That's all I will say.
Thank you, Alex. I think it's absolutely important for us to normalize that many of us go on the job market multiple times, whether it be at the beginning, postdoctorate, or even later on in our career, and that is fine and a good thing. And there's a lot of learning from doing it multiple times. We are at 12:04.
For a few seconds.
So why don't we, there's a final question, and it's about publishing. I'll combine them. And that's really thinking about solo author versus co-authored work. I think both Siba and Alex have talked a little bit about this, and the ways in which search committees look at solo versus co-authored work. I'll quickly weigh in on this as someone who has sat on a few search committees and continues to sit on search committees. I think the reality is, as Siba said, that part of it is absolutely the importance of getting mentored, right? And so writing, co-authoring with a senior scholar or even a junior scholar certainly demonstrates that you are being mentored or are writing and publishing. If you are co-authoring, I think in many fields, and I'll pass this along really shortly, but I think in many fields, it's pretty traditional to co-author as opposed to solo author. And so it is absolutely acceptable to co-author with faculties. One thing to think about, though, is if you are co-authoring with more senior scholars, the committee will see you as publishing, but may not see those ideas as originating from you. And so now I will pass it on to Siba to think about the ways in which search committees value research work as solo versus co-authored.
I actually don't have much to add to your point, Talani. The only thing I would say, if you are co-authoring, so when I was a PhD student, I co-authored with my dissertation chair, but I was the first author in some, and then second author in others. I was willing to take up a bulk of the work, right? So I can learn. All I wanted is the guidance from my chair to learn. So in the first authorship work, in my cover letter, I probably would also describe how this the scope of this work and my role in it, and show the extent to which I took ownership or engaged in the project.
A few more thoughts if we have time.
Depends on how brief your thoughts are, Alex. No, we have time for you to finish up, and then I'll close it out.
Very brief. How many jobs should you apply to? I think there are basically two schools of thoughts. Okay, so some will say, well, any job that is slightly, even if it's slightly related to your field, yes, go for it. And some will say, hey, yes, only go for jobs you're interested in. I tend to go in line with the second school of thoughts. Like, you apply for jobs that you're really interested in, that really fit who you are, your research agenda, and what you want to do. Although I know it can be tricky. The reason I take that position is because in that case, you probably can only apply for a few jobs, but you can do them well, really well, i.e. your cover letter is on point, well tailored. And if you are tailoring your cover letter, it's not just a matter of changing the address of this new institution. I mean, you basically have to rework your cover letter to fit this new job that you're applying to. So that's what I would say. How many jobs you want to apply to? I would take the second route, but yes, open to people's views and all of that.
So I want to thank each of our panelists today for this sort of informative and really helpful advice. So thank you, Siba, William, Walter, Alex, and Kim. Please feel free to send if you have additional questions or questions weren't answered. I think, Leslie, can I volunteer you to have them send? Because I think we'd all be willing to potentially answer additional questions. I certainly would be, even though we do need to end. So maybe if you have additional questions that we didn't get to, reaching out to the email from the registration, and would be happy to sort of follow up with you. But I want to just thank each of you for your shares, your advice, and your transparency about the process. I think for many of us, it feels really opaque. And so just really want to appreciate that. And we, of course, thank APPAM and Leslie Ofori for setting this up and bringing us together. Have a wonderful afternoon. And once again, hopefully this was quite helpful to you in your job search process.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
afternoon. Bye.